Hello everyone. So earlier this month, the UK National Home Brewing Competition took place, and I'm very pleased to say that one of my beers took home the Best in Show prize from that competition. So in this video, I'm going to break down the recipe and process for that beer so that you guys could have a go at brewing it yourself if you want to. Now, just to mention, one of the sponsors of that competition, the Malt Miller, is putting this beer out as an all-grain recipe kit. So I'm going to put a link to that in the description, and you can jump over to their website and buy the whole recipe as a full, weighed out, ready to go kit with all the instructions and details that I'm going to go through in this video as well. So before we get into the recipe, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who was involved in the competition. So the organisers, judges, sponsors, and anybody else who was there on the day helping out. You all did a brilliant job and the competition went really smoothly. And as we all know, these things won't happen if people like you aren't putting the effort in to make it happen. So yeah, big thanks to everyone who helped to set up and run the competition. Now, first thing I want to start with is the name of this beer, because it's a little bit silly. So the beer was called Smells Lagery. I thought I'd just explain the reason for that. So I did put it into a competition before. I'm not going to say where and when the competition was or who was judging it, because one of the feedback comments on aroma for this beer from a previous competition was that it smells lagery. So that tickled me a little bit, and I thought, okay, I'm going to change the name for future competitions just to reference back to this feedback that I thought was quite amusing, because it's a pretty generic kind of term to use for as an aroma descriptor for a lager, obviously. So that's where the name comes from. And yeah, I thought it was quite funny seeing that getting read out during the awards as well. But anyway, so the beer in question was a German Heller's Exportbier. I just want to give you a quick overview of the style guidelines for that so you have an idea of what sort of beer it is. German Heller's Exportbier was formerly known as Dortmunder or Dortmunder Export. And style-wise, it sort of sits in between a Heller's and a German Pilsner. So I'll just give you the kind of headline part of the style guidelines. So German Heller's Exportbier is a golden German lager balancing a smooth malty profile with a bitter, hoppy character in a slightly above average body and strength beer. And you'll see from the other vital statistics up on the screen that ABV is a little bit higher, but otherwise the numbers do kind of sit between a Helles and a Pilsner. So let's get into the recipe. There's a link to the full Brewfather version in the description, and you can also see it over on the Malt Miller website. I want to start off talking about the yeast. So the yeast I used is Yeast 2124, which is a liquid version of the Weihenstephaner strain. A lot of people will know that as 3470, which is a dry equivalent, and it's a fantastic all-round lager yeast. But as with most lager yeast, you will definitely see a benefit from making sure you have a good, healthy pitch rate. So when I was using the 2124, I did a 2-stage starter because I don't have a gigantic 5-litre flask. You can get around that if you're using a 2 or a 3-litre flask by doing 2-stage or even 3-stage starters. So 2 stages for me to get it up to just over 400 billion cells in the pitch. And that is really going to help with lager fermentations to keep down any esters or off flavors that you might generate through the fermentation process. If you're using the dry yeast, then I would suggest at least 2 packets of that going in, again, just to make sure that pitch rate is right up there. So after the yeast, you might need to be preparing your water a bit in advance as well. And I've gone for a slightly more mineral rich water profile on this, which I will put up on the screen now. The reason for that is, in the style guidelines, it does talk about having a more minerally water profile, particularly higher in sulfates than what you might typically see with other lager styles. And for German lagers, generally you do, in my mind, tend to get a slightly more crisp or biting kind of bitterness from the hops. And the style guidelines, again, do talk about the bitterness being a little bit prominent in the aftertaste. Upping the sulfate levels will help you to bring out that hop bitterness a little bit more. So for things like a German Pilsner and Dortmunders, that's something that you can do to emphasize the hops a little bit with the sulfate levels. We also want to make sure that we're aiming for a nice low mash pH with this beer. That's going to help to give it that nice crisp, clean finish. and avoid any astringency being drawn out from the malts during your mashing and sparging process particularly. So I've adjusted it with phosphoric acid. I'm not going to give you any specific figures for how much to use, because obviously that will be dependent on how you're going about your water profile building and other things related to your system and setup. So let's get on to the malt bill. The foundation of this beer is a really high quality base malt, which in this case is floor malted Bohemian Pilsner. It's really good. It is expensive, but it's worth the money. And if you can't get that, then just go for the best quality Pilsner malt that you can get. Ideally, a German one for authenticity's sake. So in addition to that, we've got just over 2% Carahel, which is a very light kind of German crystal malt or caramel malt. And that is just going to help to add a little bit of sweetness and build the malt flavour in there. And then the same quantity of Carapils, which is doing a little bit of the same job, but also things like head retention supposedly can be improved with that as well. So just over 4% total Cara malts in there. So as far as the mash goes, we're doing a very simple single infusion 66 degree mash for 60 minutes. You could potentially look at step mashing or even decoction for a beer like this, but I've kept it simple and the beer came out all right. So in this case, particularly with this base malt, you're not going to lose out too much from just doing a single infusion. And then the hop schedule, we're looking at all Saphir hops. Saphir is, I mean, it's been around for quite a while now, but it is one of the newer sort of noble hops that have come out of Germany. And I really like it. It has, you'll see it in quite a lot of kind of craft lagers and things like that. But it's, to me, it's just a really nice noble hop, but just with a little bit more oomph. And you can tease some fruity flavors out of it as well. Although in my experience, it tends to perform more like a traditional noble hop if it's on the hot side, and you can tend to get a little bit more of those kind of maybe fruity notes out of it if you are dry hopping with it on the cold side. So yeah, I'll put up the kind of wheel or flavor wheel for that hop on the screen. You can see from that it does have quite a wide range of flavors in it, but which ones you get out of it will depend on the point that you use it in the brew house. So we've got 46 grams of the Saphir going in as a first wort hop, which is going to obviously build most of the bitterness for it. It's a fairly low alpha acid hop, so you are dealing with a fairly large quantity there as the boil addition. And then we've got 20 grams going in at 15 minutes, and we've got another 20 grams going in as a 20-minute hop stand, for which I've dropped the temperature down to 80 degrees C. Now, the IBUs for that total out at 34, which is a little bit outside of the style guidelines, but I always tend to lean a little bit more towards the top end when it comes to the sort of IBU guidelines for lagers and things like that, because I find that probably when you factor in the kind of homebrew level utilization and stuff, that I think the actual IBUs you're getting out are probably a little bit lower, generally speaking, than what's predicted in the software. So when you're chilling your wort down, we want to get it as close to 12 degrees C as possible, which is where we're going to start the fermentation off. Now, my fermentation schedule is what some people would describe as the fast lager method, and it's basically holding it at 12 degrees for a week and then ramping it up by 2 degrees every couple of days until we hit 20 degrees, where we're going to hold it for a diacetyl rest, and then we can get into crash cooling the beer and starting off the lagering process. I did ferment this beer under pressure, which does help to speed up that process, but this yeast strain does generally ferment out quite quickly for a lager yeast anyway, so you should probably be all right with that schedule either way. But do bear in mind, if it looks like there's a lot of fermentation activity going on, you might want to extend the cool portion of your ferment a little bit longer. So for me, conditioning and lagering this beer is the final key point in the process. Once you've crash cooled it after fermentation and either transferred it to keg or bottled it, you want to be lagering this beer for at least a couple of months, I would say. At the point that it went into the competition, my one was just under 3 months old, so it had a really good period of lagering, and that is just going to help to, first of all, clarify the beer. This yeast is a powdery one. It does need time to settle out. You could use some fining agents to help speed that along, but it will drop bright with time. But be prepared for the first few pints definitely to be a little bit cloudy, especially if you are drinking it before it has been lagered and conditioned properly. And yeah, it's also just going to bring that crispness out of the beer and give you that nice, well conditioned, clean finish that we want from these sorts of beers. Carbonation wise, I force carb this to about 2.4 volumes of CO2, which is not massively high for a lager, but I don't think with this particular style that you necessarily want it to be super fizzy and carbonated. So yeah, that was the level that I went for, but I think anywhere between sort of 2.4 and probably about 2.6, 2.7 would be about the right ballpark for me. So that's pretty much everything as far as the recipe goes. If you've got any further questions, do obviously ping them up in the comments, but let's drink some of this beer. So there we have it. That is Smells Lagery, German Heller's export beer, and best of show at the UK National. And those are the medals, which I'm going to be wearing round the house for at least the next week. You don't have to take my word on it that this is a good beer. So get into that recipe, give it a go, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I am. Cheers.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know? That or his dudeness or duder or, you know, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.